Yeah. Inspiration and hope. I like that.
Raising awareness of PPI.
Lots about new ideas. So I guess there's lots of people in the room that have done some PPI but are looking for new ideas about how it can be done differently. New techniques.
Joined up thinking.
Yeah. I think the joined up thinking is interesting because you'll see all of the different partners, they're starting to join up so that people are kind of involved in lots of different organisations, but that joined up thinking to stop any duplication of effort is good. Entertainment. That's Alex's domain, that's not mine.
Again, passing the responsibility.
Yep.
Okay, these are coming in thick and fast.
So it'd be interesting to go back to these at the end of the day to see, actually, have we met some of these?
Yeah. So we're going to have to move on there just for time. So, more about the theme of today, which is increasing diversity. So, what groups of people do you think are not regularly involved in research?
That was young people from Jim. I've seen Jim's phone. I know this isn't going to be. Now, interestingly, those first three that are up there are three of our work groups this afternoon. Roma community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marginalised groups.
People with learning difficulties.
People in rural areas. Yeah. I think there are one or two of our partners from Cumbria here today.
Man on the clapper mommy.
People in full-time employment. I think quite often when we think about diversity, we think about different minority communities, but not necessarily about things like people in full-time employment.
Yeah.
I know we hold our panel meetings on a Friday afternoon, and if you work, then that's difficult, so it's interesting. Again, one of the groups that we've got for this afternoon.
The disenfranchised is an interesting one.
Yeah. Carers and social care service users. I know we've got Wade. Wade, thank you. Wade is here, and Wade's got a stand at the back which looks at social care research as well.
You're not supposed to know us.
Oh, was it you? I thought I was pointing somebody in your direction. Shh.
Okay, so we'll move on there. I think that's slowed down. And so we're looking for the reasons here. So why do you think certain groups of people do not get involved in research? So what barriers do you think there are? So awareness.
Time. Yeah.
The time to take part.
Time. Time, and people didn't know about it. So we've got some awareness raising to do still. Lack of time.
Feel it's too academic.
Yep. Not knowing it's going on. So quite a lot there about people just not knowing that it's happening. English not the first language. Think they've got nothing to offer.
I've got one there that's touched on feedback as well, so that you never see the results, which is a common problem, I think, nationally. Feeding back to people who are involved in research.
It's quite hard, isn't it? Because you might comment on somebody's research proposal, and it might take them 2 years to get funded, and then another year for the contracts to come through. So it could actually be 3 to 4 years before you see the real impact. It is quite difficult to keep that feedback loop going. Scared. I think if you are feeling that you might want to get involved and you're feeling a bit scared, there's quite a few people here today who are involved in stuff, so I'm sure they'll make themselves known and you can have a chat to them. It's not as scary as it sounds.
Okay. Right, so that's the questions finished for this session, but what we'll do is we'll leave this up, so it'll be running in the background. So if you leave it logged in on your phone on Menti, if you've got any questions throughout our morning presentations, if you just submit the question, you can submit as many as you like, and what we'll do is through the Q&A, we'll have some questions from the audience, but we'll also refer to Mentimeter as well. And the questions are submitted anonymously, so you don't have to be worried about asking specific things. Okay, so if we...
Okay, so you'll see in your programme that Lynn Corner was due to present today, but unfortunately Lynn's had to go off to a meeting, so I've stepped in. So hopefully I can do a good job and represent Lynn as she wanted to be represented. So what I want to do is just very quickly is give some context around what we're going to be doing today. This is the first event that we've run as a network, creating connections, and you'll hear that word used, or that term used, quite often throughout the day. And I'm going to try and give you an overview of what that means, but also about what we're going to hear today. Some great examples of PPI that's been done across the region, and by the region we mean the North East and North Cumbria. Try and challenge, I think, your ideas of what we mean when we talk about diversity. And we've already started to do that, and some of you have come up with some great examples of what do we mean by communities that are not included. So that's about that diversity. And we're going to try the new technology. So the first bit went okay, so we'll see how the rest of it goes. So inclusion and diversity is a strategic priority for the region. It covers the North East and from the 1st of October, North Cumbria. So we're quite a large and diverse community. If you think about the type of landscape that we have in North Cumbria, very rural, across to a very urban, kind of Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, it's very diverse in terms of that. However, the North East itself is the most ethnically homogenous region in England, 93% British. So we do have our challenges to make sure that we're actually including all communities. But we've still got to make sure that it's accessible. Lots of you said there that you can't get along to things because of the time or the time of day that it's done. So it's not just about which communities we involve, but it's also how we involve those communities. Susan Chrysos, who was here earlier, and her colleagues, they looked at diversity in a slightly different way. They didn't just want to look at particular groups. They wanted to try and widen it out and what do we really mean by diversity. So she developed this a framework to conceptualise dimensions of diversity. So when we're in the groups this afternoon, we're not just thinking about, if you're in the group with that's looking at people with mental health issues, you're not just looking at mental health, you might want to think of some of these other things. So the backgrounds of those involved, sometimes termed hard to reach or seldom heard. And the list goes on. We need to look at the demographics of those involved. We might set up a group for young people here in Newcastle, but how do we get young people in rural Cumbria involved? So it's about the demographics. It's about how we practice PPI. There's lots of different models of doing PPI. It doesn't have to be the same, and in fact it shouldn't be the same. It should be fit for purpose. And how do we deliver it? How do we facilitate meaningful involvement? So the strategy for underrepresented groups, it's a strategic priority. It's something that we're all focused on. The afternoon is going to be spent looking at how we can improve diversity, and in fact we've been able to secure funding for the next year to actually keep these meetings going over the next year, because quite often you come along to a meeting like this and there's lots of really good ideas, but then what happens? So what happens now is that each of the groups that we hold this afternoon, we've got funding to run each of those groups 4 times across the year, so we can develop a strategy for how actually those different groups will be involved in PPI. Hopefully that will go some way to breaking down some of those barriers that you've all identified, and build up strong relationships with the communities. We were talking last night, and it's actually that's the thing that takes the time, and that's what you've got to do. You can't just go into a new community that you would like to be involved in, to welcome in. You've got to build up that relationship to make sure that they feel safe to do so. And we want to do that in collaboration with Involve, and Zoe's speaking next, and create a joined-up network here in the North East. And I think we've gone a long way to that. We've got lots of the partners here, and lots of them are speaking today. We don't want to be wasting resources by repeating things. So I'm going to finish there. Hopefully Lynn's not too disappointed with how I presented her today. And we're going to hand over to Zoe, who's going to give you the national context.
you, that's great. I was trying to work out, it's nicer if I can see you. I can see you better when I put my glasses on, but it also makes me feel a bit ill because I'm not used to wearing them, so I'm trying to work out whether that's the best thing to do or not. I'll pop them on. Okay, great. So, hello everybody, my name's Zoe Gray, I'm the Director of Involve. Is there anyone in the room that hasn't heard of Involve? One person over there, two people over there. That's great, because I'm going to tell you a bit more about us in a minute as part of what I'm saying to you today. So I was really pleased to be invited here to talk to you about the national picture in public involvement and engagement. As we know it, PPIE, fondly. Someone's got to think of a better way of making that an acronym. And it's fantastic to be in a region, as we've just heard, where everybody is really enthusiastic about collaborating together and making the best use of our resources and knowledge to really advance public involvement and engagement. And for me, it's also exciting that this area is an area that has been successful in securing a small amount of funding through Involve and the RDS partnership, which is aimed at reaching out. So it gives the kind of impetus to really go out and speak to communities, develop sustainable and long-term relationships with communities, because it's not just about sort of having a little bit of a chat here and there and leaving people. So we're really interested in seeing how that develops in your area. And I hope that you'll sort of challenge, really, the partnership creating connections in what they're going to be doing in reaching out into communities in your area. So, just moving on. So, the people slide. I really wanted to emphasise from the outset how important it is for all of us to value and recognise the many different ways in which we connect and work together, because that's really the basis of why we're here. So that's community net members, clinicians, researchers, practitioners, carers, whether you call them consumers, some people do, patients and the public, to be part of that shaping of health and research priorities, policies and practice. And so events like this, storage space issue, there we go. Events like this, work you're doing in communities, all of them contribute to that goal of public-centred research. And we do have agreed terminology, I'm obsessed with technology, thank you Joe for put that in my mind. We have agreed terminology about involvement. For those of you that aren't familiar with the terms, involvement we talk about as being doing research with and by the public, so that's a fully involvement process. About engagement being more about talking about research and connecting with people about research. And participation is more when you're the subject of research, so you're on a trial, a clinical trial, or you're being studied, essentially. And the reason that we name those is not to kind of separate them out and make them a separate science, which I think some people sometimes do jump on the bandwagon about, but it's really to acknowledge that they're all relevant and important activities if we're going to create future health and care systems, organisations which meet society's needs. And of course they feed each other in very many ways. So if you're talking to someone about research, can encourage them to become part of a trial, to be studied as part of a trial. Becoming a public co-applicant on a research application can mean that you're talking to a lot of people and encouraging them to be part of research, and so on. And obviously it's really important that, as has been said already, all voices are heard, because services, treatments, care, systems, they'll only work if they take into account the needs of the wider society. And that's going to be a theme of the day, so I won't steal anybody else's thunder by talking about that further. So public involvement in the NIHR, I think it's fair to say that NIHR has led the way as a research funder in terms of public involvement. It's worn its heart really clearly on its sleeve for over a decade now about involving patients and the public in the doing, the designing, the disseminating of research. And why does it do that? Because it gets the evidence base, it understands that, it really upholds the rights of people to be involved in the decisions that affect them. And it sees generally, so the researchers and all of the people involved in the NIHR see day-to-day practice of how involvement makes for the best, high-quality, relevant and impactful research. And so to keep NIHR itself on track in its endeavour, it brought Involve under its wing in 2006, which was the first government-funded entity globally that was devoted to the advancement of involvement. And to our knowledge, it still is the only one, but if anyone wants to correct me, I'll be happy to hear about that. So championed by Involve, NIHR was the first research funder in the UK to make it fully a requirement of funding that there had to be public and patient involvement. And others around the system has followed. A lot of charities are doing a great job in this regard now. And NIHR has put quite a lot of investment, I would say, in its capability around public involvement. It's invested in centres and institutions that are delivering National Institute for Health Research work, so that includes the work under sort of the RDS and other areas. And from what we know, there are around 200 people across the NIHR, which is a very diverse system, that are part of what you could say was a public involvement workforce, so people whose responsibility, have some responsibilities for shaping and moving forward public involvement and liaising directly with the community on that. And there's a lot of frontline leadership that happens because of that, which is great. I was just talking to Helen this morning sort of about her new plans in her new role, and really sort of building on that collaborative endeavour. There's a lot of training support that happens. And the change that has happened to make public involvement, to make public-centred research, I suppose, a reality in the complex world of NIHR has been really strong so far. But I think what we have to recognise that it is a long-term endeavour. It's not something that you can just say, right, okay, we did that and we did this. Okay, we're tick-boxed now, we're done. We've got everything sorted. It's a large and distributed structure that we're working in. Organisations change, people change, they leave their jobs, they go on to other jobs, systems and processes change. And we, of course, then have our world around us, which if we pick up the papers any day of the week, we know how the health and the social care system are changing and affecting things. So there's a constant need to prioritise and develop our involvement and constantly realign how we work and reinforce that. And what I've been really cheered about is that the NIHR is really up for it. It's committed for the long time, it's got some ambition about that, and I'll be able to give you a little peek shortly into the NIHR future focus and what I think that means for our work with patients, public and carers. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of tour first of some of the approaches that NIHR takes to involvement, engagement, and indeed participation. And the first place I should start, for those people in the room that didn't know about Involve, is to just explain a little bit about us. We are the lead for advancement of involvement across NIHR, but also quite way beyond NIHR, so that's nationally and internationally in many ways. And this triangle here, I hope you can see the orange, because I realised afterwards that orange isn't the greatest on a white background. But around the edge, we show you all of the sorts of partners that we work with, so national charities, international research funders and government organisations, and the regional networking structures like the Creating Connections here, which are really supporting that coordination and connectivity across the regions and then linking up to the national picture. And Involve's existence really is about focusing on the system involving patients and that system to better gear itself to be able to strengthen and improve involvement in research. And so the collaboration is a pretty big must, and our work spans activity that we would recognise if you're familiar with those terms of engagement and participation too. And what's very key for Involve, that everything that we do is driven by lay advisors, by our public patients and carers. So we have governance structures which include them, and they're extremely brilliant in what they do and really challenge us in our work. And then at every part of the work that we do, all of the different projects, activities, etc., we always have patient and public involvement. And that's based on sort of people's assessment of their own skills and interests as well. So it's a really kind of collaborative process. Anyone can access our resources, our tools and our guidance. And you know, that they're available to everybody, they're available to researchers. There's a lot that's of relevance to patients and public that don't know about public involvement, through to researchers that kind of want to know how to do it or how to advance what they're already doing. There's stuff that's aimed at public involvement leads and how they can sort of push things better. And they're used frequently. You know, we have sort of over I think it's 20,000 downloads actually of our briefing notes for researchers a week. So it's quite widely used, and we're always updating those now as well. And the thing that we're doing differently, probably than we were 2 years ago at Involve, is having a key leadership role in a number of areas that respond directly to recommendations of a strategy that got put in place in 2015. And that's called Going the Extra Mile, that you can see there on the screen. And it's an overarching strategy for involvement and engagement across NIHR, and it takes us to 2025 in wanting how we want to achieve some of those recommendations. And the work that we do to respond to those recommendations is about how can we make sustainable change and practice happen over a number of years that really take forward the involvement space. And so we focus on, as you're going to be focusing on today, diversity and inclusion. And Paula from Involve will tell you a little bit, we'll talk to you a bit more about diversity and inclusion in a minute as well. Learning and development, because clearly if we're all to be involved in this space, whether you're a patient, member of the public, carer, or whether you're a researcher, you want to be able to, understand what the best ways that you can be involved. So learning and development and connecting that, what's going on in that area is really important to us. And then a third area is on co-production. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. And at the heart of it, which I don't think is very clear to me anyway, certainly even with my glasses on, is the new national standards for public involvement. So I'll tell you about that in a sec as well. So we're seeing some great progress happening from these areas that I've just described. And those are challenging NIHR to really broaden, deepen and make more consistent its approaches to involvement. And we think that by doing that, it will make NIHR more resistant to any of the outside changes that happen on the environment that kind of make it a little bit more difficult to do involvement moving forward. And all of the progress is directly attributable in so many ways to public and the patients. So just to take you through a few of those. Warwick, we now have governmental representatives in, well, from very far afield, from Botswana, from Australia, from the US. And why would you do this? Well, you can learn a lot from what other countries are doing and how they're shaping their systems in public involvement, or indeed not. There's this term that people talk about now of kind of frugal innovation as well, where people are just doing natural work in communities, which sometimes over in the UK feels unnatural to people, and how can we learn from what they're doing there. But also things like the evidence base in public involvement. If we're to keep this really fully on the agenda and everybody behind it, it is important to pay attention to the evidence as well. And there's evidence that's all around the world that combines is really quite powerful and we can make great cases for. But also on the lower level of problem solving, how do you do this? What do you do when you encounter this sort of situation? So that's quite an interesting area that we're involved in. Another one which will probably affect you sort of more directly in however you're involved in the UK is around national standards for public involvement. And this is really responding to something that's been going on for quite a while. So when we've been talking to people, they've been saying, well, so how do you tell people what good looks like in public involvement? And obviously, there's got to be some flexibility in that. But people wanted to be able to see in many different ways how they can match what they're doing and how they can improve what they're doing. I co-produced this work. It's not purely an Involve thing by any stretch of the imagination. It's been very much a collaborative venture, and it's a partnership across NIHR, other nations of the UK, and patients and public. And there's been, I think, over 1,000 organisations and individuals involved so far in shaping what those standards look like and the indicators that you can see up there. We are now in the process of, there are 47, very fancy phrase, test beds where people are trying it out. So people are saying, okay, now we've got these indicators about what good looks like in public involvement. How can we implement that if we're a patient group? What does that look like for us? If we're a researcher leading a research project, what does that look like for us? If we're a public involvement lead and we're trying to help other people overcome their blockages in doing public involvement, what does that mean for us? So all of those 47 test beds cover a range of those different sort of scenarios. And they include partners from across the UK, it's not just England-based, and they include charities. So it'll be really interesting to learn how people are finding implementing the standards. And as a result of that, in March, we'll bring all of that information together next year. and finalise the standards. And I think the latest information is we're planning to kind of launch those more in September next year. But that's not to say they're not already shaping things. So for those of you that are aware of, gosh, I can never remember what the acronym means, but the CLARCs, part of the infrastructure, does anybody remember what that stands for? Which are now the ARCs, the Applied Health Research Collaboratives, and they are in there as part of their new contracts, which are just being decided at the moment. The standards are part of that expectation. So the Department of Health has said, yes, we get what you're trying to do with this, to make people sort of really stand up and say what they're trying to achieve in public involvement. And we'd like to implement that as part of the new contracts for stuff that's funded around the NIHR. And the third area just to highlight is on co-production. And by the way, our stand is over there. We don't have our fancy pop-up, but we do have some of our brochures on co-production and diversity and other areas there. So co-production was a hotly contested area when we started getting into this. I don't know what it means for all of you. Actually, that would be a good Mentimeter thing, wouldn't it, to see what it means for people. But coming from the service delivery background that I do, it's something that was kind of a natural part of our work. It was about the sharing of the power and the knowledge of how we developed things with everybody in the room, from the beginning right through to the end. And when we came to talk about it in a research context, we found people were saying that they are co-producing. And we thought, no, you're not. We thought you've got some good features of the things that you're doing, but that doesn't really represent co-production. So in collaboration with academics, clinicians, researchers, patients and public, we've got to a consensus about what does it mean. It's taken a long while. And we've got some definitions and principles around that. And the guidance is available on the website. It's also over there if you want to grab one. And the next stage really is to elaborate that further. So let's actually help people to see what that means in practice and how, if they think that that's relevant for the work that they're doing, it can help them take forward their involvement practice. We've done some webinars. I don't know if anybody's been part of those. So all of this technology stuff has been happening. And we're sort of moving forward to develop it as one area which can help to progress involvement, because it certainly isn't a panacea for everything, and it isn't appropriate always for every type of research and every scenario. And I had to put this in because I'm not a researcher myself, but I know that researchers... oops, there we go, full profile space again. There we go. I know that nature is the holy grail of where you want to get information out, because not least that they have 1.5 million Twitter followers. So I just needed to say that. Okay, so what else does NIHR do around the system? So it does a lot of work with making sure that patients and the public can inform research priorities. It puts a lot of investment in it through its centres, and particularly through the James Lind Alliance. Had anybody heard of the James Lind Alliance? I'm going to do it the other way around this time. Great. Anyone involved in the James Lind Alliance? Brilliant. Excellent. So you know all about that. So it's a kind of social movement, really, but it's nested in NIHR and it's funded by NIHR to make it happen. And it builds partnerships with patients, publics, clinicians, the researchers in themed areas to really talk about, let's get to what are the unanswered questions that are in this area, in this sort of condition, this disease area, etc. To make research funders aware of the issues that matter most, when it's talked about amongst all of those people, and then to influence how research gets funded. So trying to get these into practice. And I'm really pleased now that actually they've got 40 active live priority setting partnerships. But a lot of those, if you go onto their website, of the 60 completed PSPs, they've got loads of examples of how those are actually now into research. So obviously research takes a long while, so a lot of them say this is in research, this is funded by this charity. But it's worth taking a look at those and actually seeing how much is going on in that space. And they're often about the things that really make the most to people's lives. So, oh gosh, right, okay, thank you very much. 5 minutes, I'll move on. So the other things that NIHR does, it does a lot of campaign work to raise awareness of research. And obviously it's difficult to get in front of all of the whole population, but it does a lot of big campaigns. The I Am Research campaign makes a huge splash. Over 160 events in this year, and there was a lot of sort of downloads and people looking for research in their areas as a result of that. The Clinical Research Network run the Patient Ambassadors, Research Ambassadors scheme, which is about the peer-to-peer, kind of helping people to understand what research is and what's available and how they can connect in. and then I'm going to really speed up. Research for you. A lot of work is done on the participation end of it as well. So how can people find out how to get onto clinical trials? So if they have a condition or a disease and they think, and perhaps their GP tells them that they can access a trial, or they might have favourable treatment if they look into research. You can find out all of the different sorts of trials that are ongoing and available via the UK Clinical Trials Gateway. And for dementia, there's a real joined-up approach via the Joined Dementia Research. So just coming back, I did promise to tell you about what the future looks for NIHR, and I want the opportunity to do that. You may know there's been work happening to finalise a new strategy for the NIHR, which is based on renewing an existing strategy. For those of you that may have been or not familiar with it, that was called Best Research for Best Health. And the new strategy for NIHR is due to launch in November, and there will be a slight I can assure you not too much money was spent on that, so that's good. And myself, Simon, and lay representatives have been, so Simon Denegri, who's the National Director for Patients, Public and Carers in Research, and lay representatives have been involved in developing the part of the strategy that is, and actually throughout the strategy, to make sure that public involvement is really a key part of that. It's been given more focus in the new strategy, so you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice in the mission, if you compare it on the internet when it comes out, you'll see that patients and the public engagement and involvement goes right up. It's not actually at the top. We did have a little bit of an argument about that, but it is the second part, which is way better than it was before. But more importantly, there's a whole section that's devoted to working with patients, public and carers, and that really gives some clearer commitments, I think, in terms of rights and how NIHR wants to build up its relationship. And just to show you a few things. So this was based on the future of health. And essentially, it's moving forward into the future, social care and public health are going to be more important. And putting patients at the heart of that public involvement is going to need to change in line with that. Because if you're thinking about public health, you're talking about population level involvement of some description rather than the kind of traditional clinical research-led patient needs, patient groups focus. And an emphasis is on clusters of morbidity linked to the ageing population, and clearly that shifts an emphasis from looking at disease and involving people and talking about disease to multiple different things that affect them. So let's go through that. So, and the final thing that I just wanted to talk about in relation to the strategy is about it's really about making NIHR easier to understand and access for everybody, because it isn't really that easy at the moment, and making sure that the governance and the accountability sit in the right parts and that people know where that accountability sits. So I did just want to show you the final slide. It is the final slide, Joe. Don't worry. There is a senior leadership team that has already been set up for public involvement across the NIHR, and that's headed up by the National Director, but it's also comprising the leaders from across the NIHR in public involvement, and that's me included. And what we're trying to do is make better use of the resources across NIHR to join things up more and to make sure that we know who is trying to do things that support us to move things forward in line with the Going the Extra Mile strategy. And so there's a plan with strategic priorities that are agreed. The role of centres and units are set out within that, and we can give you more information about that. But you'll see that the standards is one of the key 5 areas, as well as measuring the impact of public involvement. And an audit of the Going the Extra Mile strategy is currently underway. The Cabinet Office have decided to tell the Department of Health how well they're doing or not on Going the Extra Mile, so I think that would be a very useful tool to show us nationally what progress we're making and where we need to go in the future. And this is just the final thing. The NIHR People's Scorecard, please ask your NIHR people that you're working with about this, because in the next 2 months you will have the opportunity to say how well you think the NIHR is doing against the indicators matched to the strategy. So if you're a public member, a carer, or a patient that is involved in NIHR research and work, then you're going to have the opportunity to have your say. And so that's that. So hopefully I haven't given her too much of a heart attack.
Thank you. We're going to have questions for a panel of people after you've heard the next presentation. What I'm going to do now is try and put some local context into some of the things that Zoe's mentioned about some of the work that's going on nationally and how we've kind of operationalised that, how we do that here in the North East and North Cumbria. So we're going to hopefully highlight some of the opportunities there are for involvement in some of the groups that are represented here today. And in this presentation will be myself from the Research Design Service, Helen from the Clinical Research Network, and Alex Mitchell as well from Voice. So hopefully we'll give you some opportunities for how you can be involved or how as a researcher you can contact local people. So I'm going to tell you about my role within the Research Design Service here in Newcastle. And I can see, I'm going to ask a couple of our public members from the Research Design Service if you can just wave a hand. We've got Jim at the back, Dawn, Carolyn, oh, my mind's gone blank. Louise, sorry. So if you wanted to find out any more about the Research Design Service and how patients get involved, I'm sure they would like you to go and have a chat with them over lunch and they can tell you what their experience has been. I'm sure they'll be very honest. So what I'm going to cover in these short few minutes is to tell you about what is the Research Design Service, what are we and what do we do? What do we do in terms of PPI specifically? What opportunities there are for you either as a researcher or as a member of the public to become involved? And then I've got a great slide at the end as to why and who should get involved. I can say it's a great slide because it's not mine. So the Research Design Service, NIHR Research Design Service, often shortened to the RDS, for the North East and North Cumbria, is one of 10 regional services across the country. So there's one of these across every region in the UK, sorry, in England. The aim of these services is to increase the number and the quality of research applications from health and social sciences. Okay? So we know that the research applications go in international funding bodies, but they can come through the RDS, and the idea is that we can help them to improve the quality of those applications so that hopefully more of them get funded. The North East team has experienced researchers in all methodologies. We've got links in with statisticians, health economics, health psychologists, qualitative researchers, mixed methods researchers. So whatever research that you're doing, we'll be able to point you in the direction of an expert who can help you develop that application. Research Design Service also offers methodological advice. So if you want to come and say, well, this is the question that I want to ask or I want answered, but I'm not sure how to get there, you can have a meeting with one of the advisors, and there'll be the advisors on the RDS stand, and they can help guide you. And there's a few researchers here today who've been through that process. And I should say that all of that advice is free of charge. So what about the advice that we give to researchers? If you're here as a researcher today, the big kind of thing that the take-home message is early involvement, is what we would say. If people come to me and ask for advice around PPI, the earlier you can involve patients in your research, the better. You could consider involving patients in every stage of the research cycle. It might not be appropriate for all research, but you can consider how you can involve patients at every stage. It needs to be done in collaboration. It doesn't need to be a tick box exercise. It needs to be real involvement. I think if you send an application into a funding body, they can very quickly tell if it's tick box and you haven't really involved patients. It needs to be real involvement. And is the involvement model that you're using, is it appropriate to your setting? You'll hear this afternoon of some very, very different ways of involving patients. You've got to think about what the context is. What's the patient group that you're trying to contact? If you're a member of the public sat here and thinking, well, actually that sounds quite interesting, how can I get involved? You could sign up and be a member of our consumer panel, and I'll tell you what that is in a moment. You can conduct online reviews. We send out our lay summaries or some lay summaries from researchers to our panel members, and we ask them to read them in terms of, do they make sense? Are they easily accessible? Is the language that's being used too technical? And the researchers, the feedback that we've had from the researchers is that that information, that advice has been invaluable. So I said we hold a consumer panel. This is a picture of a few of our consumer panel members. We meet twice a month, once here in Newcastle, once down in the south of the region in Middlesbrough, and shortly we'll be meeting in Cumbria. And we invite 2 researchers a month along to those meetings. The researchers will stand up and give a brief insight into their, the work that they're proposing, and then they'll ask for feedback from the panel. And the panel is made up of a wide range of backgrounds, people who've got their own chronic condition, or who have been carers, or just have a general interest in healthcare. And there's a big range, wide range of ages as well. So people are getting a good insight into what do the general public think about my research. So that's the consumer panel. We can send things out, as I said, for online review, and we get the comment on the lay summary. That's the bit that's really got to be well done. If it's not accessible to members of the public, your research, then it's not going to get beyond the first stage of your funding. So it's something that is essential to get right. We also have a PPI fund. We've got a small pot of money, a very small pot of money, that will allow you to do some PPI work in a very specific field. So if you felt that coming to that consumer panel, actually that's not going to be very beneficial to me because I'm looking at a very different group of patients, then we can help support you with that. One example I can give you is a researcher came to us and they wanted to do some research around the dental health of homeless people. And he didn't feel that he would get the feedback that he needed from the consumer panel. So we said that we would help fund, and I think FMS Engage helped fund as well, to actually go and work, do some work within People's Kitchen, actually doing PPI where homeless people were and getting the input from them. So that's what that fund can be used for. And then obviously we've set up the Creating Connections network. There's lots happening, and hopefully through this expanding network, you'll get to know about a lot more that's going on. But when I'm talking to researchers about PPI, I try and get them to look beyond the question of, am I doing PPI? Yes, tick. That's not PPI. How is it done? Have they selected the right model for the right group of patients? Who is it done by? Is there a lead for PPI on the application? And is that person a public member, or is it a job of a researcher to do that? So how actually is it being done? How will you measure the success of the PPI? And we've already heard about the national standards. Is that how you're going to measure success of how PPI was done for that particular project? How can we evaluate it? What are the measures of evaluation? How can we support people to be involved? What training is on offer? How is a researcher going to actually support a member of the public to be involved in a steering group meeting where you may have 5 professors and 2 statisticians around a table, and you're going to ask a patient to come along and take part in that discussion? How are you going to support the patient to actually have a meaningful involvement in that meeting? And sharing opportunities through the network. So this is the good slide. So if you're sat here today and say, I'm not sure whether I should be one of those PPI types. Who are these PPI people? So I recently a think tank with Dawn Hodgson, and Dawn, who's one of our panel members, came up with this slide because she wanted people to have a think about what type of people get involved in PPI. There is nobody that doesn't have some experience. So how can you get involved with the RDS? You could actually go to the RDS stand, which is the first one as you go out the door there, and fill in one of the postcards that lets us have your email address and your postal address so we can add you to the newsletter, and you can find out some more information. If you're a researcher, there at lunchtime, or you can request an appointment. And if you specifically wanted to find out about PPI, that would be an appointment with me, and we would meet up maybe with one of the panel members and talk you through. So lots of opportunities. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand over to Helen, and Helen's going to tell you about opportunities within the Clinical Research Network.
Hi there everybody, I'm Helen Atkinson and I'm the new Involvement and Engagement Manager for the Clinical Research Network North East North Cumbria. It's my 3rd week in post and I'm delighted to be here, and it's great to see some familiar faces. So my role is to lead on the patient and public involvement and engagement across the network and promote all the opportunities that are available for health and social care research and tell you how you can take part. So I just wanted to start off by telling you a little bit more about what the Clinical Research Network is. It's funded by the National Institute for Health Research, which is the research arm of the NHS. And the Clinical Research Network makes it possible for patients and health professionals across England to participate in clinical research studies within the NHS. And it provides all of the infrastructure to enable it to do this. And our vision in the North East, North Cumbria, is to make it the best place to take part in research for patients and for staff. And we work with patients and the public to make sure that their needs are placed at the heart of all research, and providing opportunities for patients to gain earlier access to new and better treatments through research participation. So there's a number of different things that the Clinical Research Network does, from providing funding for staff and clinical services, raising awareness of research, providing training and development to research staff so that we can have a really high quality workforce, supporting researchers to plan and set up and conduct their studies, managing all of these clinical research studies so that they run on time and to target, improving the way that research is run, and also managing the information system so that all the data is accurate and up to date. So as part of this, the patients, carers and the public are at the heart of everything that we do. They're our greatest strength, and we couldn't do what we do without them. More people than ever before are taking part in research studies, which is fantastic. And this enables new and better treatments to be developed. Patients and members of the public are also actively involved in advising us about how we can carry out research and how we can improve our service delivery. And in the CRN, we focus on a partnership approach, working with patients, carers and the public to transform and improve the delivery of clinical research in the NHS. So I'm delighted to be part of this exciting team. So there are a number of ways that you can get involved in the Clinical Research Network. And one of the ways is through becoming a patient research ambassador. And I'm delighted that we have some patient research ambassadors here today in the audience. Can you put your hand up if you're one of our patient research ambassadors? Fantastic. And I look forward to meeting all of you. So, patient research ambassadors is someone who promotes health research from a patient's point of view. You don't have to have any qualifications or experience, just enthusiasm to learn and get involved. And any individual or member of a patient carer group can take part. I've got some quotes on here as well from some of our current patient research ambassadors. I'll read one of them out because I know the font's quite small. The importance of research is simple. It is through research that we're able to treat and eventually cure conditions affecting the millions of lives of people. There are many opportunities, and the patient research ambassadors get involved in many different things. I've listed the top 10 up here, so they can help to raise awareness of research to patients, researchers and carers. They can be involved locally as part of health awareness days and part of our national campaigns. They can help us with training, work with research staff to help improve how a study might run, advise and help us to collate surveys and be really actively involved in the study. Staff, reviewing studies with research staff to review their progress to make sure that they're on the right track and they're going to recruit to target. Lay membership, so members can be on local development committees to shape patient information sheets. They can also be great ambassadors and go out and speak to local interest groups and promote the benefits of health research and encourage others to take part. They're also a valuable resource for patients, carers and the public, and encouraging others to take part. So another thing that I lead on is the Patients Research Experience Survey. And this is a valuable thing, and I hope many of you will get involved in it as you're taking part in clinical research studies. And it's basically a set of questions that we use to gain insight on what your experience was of taking part in a clinical research study, so that we can then use those results to improve the way research is run and improve service delivery. And it will allow us to improve best practice and continuously improve our research process. These were some of the responses from our survey in 2017-2018. So 87% of patients had a really good experience of participating in research, and 83% would be happy to take part in another study. It'll be fantastic to get these statistics up even higher, and I look forward to working with you all to do this. So as well as participating in clinical research studies, there are other ways that you can get involved. You can be a lay representative on a decision-making group. Within the CRN, we have lay representatives on our executive board to really help shape how we run our network. So if this is something that interests you, please let me know. We also run and organise a number of events to promote the benefits of health research. We hold awareness days and we do big campaigns as part of I Am Research to promote all the positive things about clinical research. We also invite patients, carers and the public along to plan our events, making sure that the agenda is interactive. They help us with training to make sure that it's a joint partnership. They also help us with our leaflets and newsletters to make sure that the language is clear and there isn't too much jargon. And help with looking at website content. Is it clear? Is it easy to navigate? So there's lots of things that you can do. There's also some fantastic work happening across the region, and I've included some useful links here because I'm very passionate about working with our stakeholders across the region, working with Voice, and Alex is going to talk about Voice. Join Dementia Research, which is a fantastic organisation where you can find out about dementia studies that are recruiting in your area. The UK Clinical Trials Gateway, where again you can find out if there's studies happening in your area, and the website's there. The Research Design Service, North East North Cumbria, which Joe has mentioned. And I've also included our newsroom link as well, which tells you all the news that's happening across the North East and North Cumbria and how you can get involved. So, if you are interested in participating in clinical research, the best thing to do first of all is to speak to your GP, nurse or healthcare professional. I've also got some information about other opportunities on my web pages. And I've got my contact details there, so if you have any questions or want to find out more about becoming a patient research ambassador or other opportunities, please do come and speak to me. We also have a stand at the back of the room, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues Justine, Alex and Amanda, so please come and have a chat to us. And I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Hello? Everyone here? Yeah. Okay, I'm Alex Mitchell and I'm the Engagement Project Manager of Voice. Like Helen, I've only been in the role a matter of weeks, so I think we're all pretty new here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Voice, the Voice model of patient and public involvement, and a bit about the Voice digital platform, which is a relatively new method of involving the public in research. So, what is Voice? It's a patient and public involvement and engagement network and digital platform. Voice is actually an acronym, which most people don't realise, and it stands for Valuing Our Intellectual Capital and Experience. It was established at Newcastle University in 2007, so it's been going for just over 11 years now. And it's an organisation that simply looks to harness the insights, the knowledge, the experience of patients and the public to improve research and innovation. Voice members work with researchers across the research cycle, which you can see on the right-hand side there, and they work with researchers to shape projects to ensure that the priorities and the needs of citizens are at the centre of those research projects. Because at the end of the day, citizens are the end users of research, so it's only right that they should be involved in all aspects of that process. By effectively promoting that dialogue and debate between researchers and patients and the public, we can really work to improve the relevance and the impact of research. As Joe was saying, it's really important to get that early insight, that early input into idea development. So right there at the beginning, at the identifying and prioritizing stage. So by supporting citizens to work with researchers at this pre-funding conceptual stage, they can genuinely affect the direction of the research project. So it's avoiding that all too common tokenism that's been mentioned. Voice actually have resource for that early involvement called the Voice Research Support Group. Members of the research support group here today. And they are a group of 30 voice members who meet once a month, and they can meet up to 6 researchers to provide early feedback on lay summaries, on project proposals, study design. So it's a really good way of getting that early insight, and it's also a good way of getting researchers used to involving members of the public, engaging with members of the public. We've got a couple, we've got 4 of the values on which Voice was built there, and I think the text has been slightly skewed. But we've got challenge and aspiration matters, needs and priorities matter, diversity matters, and knowledge and experience matter. So I'm going to pick out a couple. So challenge and aspiration, that's a really key one for us. And it's all about encouraging the public to not just accept what is, but to actually think outside the box and imagine what if, and to challenge the ideas of researchers where necessary in a polite and lovely way. And diversity matters. Obviously, that's the theme of today's event, and it's a challenge that we all encounter. But like the other organisations represented today, we are committed to ensure that the views of all communities are incorporated into the research process, and that can only be. And so by co-design, enabled us to work smarter and start to join up activity, because it was held all in one place. So it was moving away from managing events and workshops and debates through numerous spreadsheets and one-to-one emails and telephone communication. It allowed us to manage it all through one system. It also acts as a service for researchers to share opportunities, to capture impact, to maximize reach, and to gain insight at scale. For example, it allows an arthritis researcher here in Newcastle to involve members of the public in Leeds. It would allow members of the public in London to get involved in research in Birmingham. There's genuinely no kind of end to the impact that this can have. It actually gives us international reach. I know we're talking regionally and nationally here, but it could allow us to involve people in other countries. Because there's no, to quote Lynn Corner, our director, and some people have heard this before, from Benwell to Beijing to Birmingham, there's no reason why people can't get involved in research. And finally, one of the key values of Voice as an organisation is knowledge matters, and that informed citizens can realise the true potential of PPI in research and innovation. And through the platform, members can benefit from opportunities built around a model of knowledge exchange, so lifelong learning opportunities through courses, attending lectures, attending seminars, and taking part in research. So Voice isn't only involved in the regional infrastructure, but it's also the PPI mechanism for 2 national centres that we're lucky enough to have here in Newcastle. So that's the NIHR Innovation Observatory, the National Horizon Scanning Centre, and the National Innovation Centre for Ageing. And with this national remit, Voice is looking to collaborate with and NIHR infrastructure across the country, working together to try and join up that PPI activity and the support available for researchers and members of the public. By working with organisations in other regions, we can share learning, which is another key theme of today's event. It's learning from the organisations that are involved in patient and public involvement. And from other organisations, we can learn about how to work well with hard-to-reach communities, learning from other successes and methods that they use. So just because we struggle to involve a certain community here in Newcastle, it doesn't mean that actually some other organisations across the country have had successes engaging with that community. So it's all about sharing that learning. Collaborations across the UK also provide researchers with access to a diverse range of communities that they might not have access to here in Newcastle or the North East. The digital platform also enables those in rural locations to get involved, increasing access, which it was before. But the platform, although I'm talking about it a lot, it's not simply a silver bullet to the challenges that, of increasing diversity in research, but it is an effective tool to support and enhance the on-the-ground work being carried out. It's not the be-all and end-all, it's there to enhance the work that we've been carrying out for years. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Voice. Feel free to come and see us. We've got a stand in the right-hand corner there, and we'll be more than happy to tell you more. We do have Voice members in the audience, so could you put your hands up, please? Great. So I'm sure they'll be more than happy to talk to you about Voice. Voice is free for anyone to join. You can register on the platform. And for researchers who are looking to see how Voice can help them in their research, we've also got a Work With Us section on the platform as well. So thank you very much.
Right, I am aware of time, but we did start late, so we're just going to take a couple of questions now before we move on to Zoe's presentation about diversity. So we'll only eat into lunch by 10 minutes, I promise. And nobody's allowed to leave early to get lunch before the rest of us. So have you got any questions, either for any of the three speakers from Creating Connections or for Zoe in particular? Any questions from the floor before we go to Alex's questions? Have we had any submitted on Mentimeter? Have we? Yep.
Okay, so the first one was actually, how do we attract more members of the public to these events? Does anyone want in particular?
Through a number of different ways. We've used Twitter quite a lot, and that's really helped to cascade our message nationally. The National Coordinating Centre has helped to retweet for us, and they have a load of contacts and people who can join in. We've promoted it on our website. We've promoted it across the North East North Cumbria. Our newsroom has promoted it for us. Word of mouth as well. I've been going out and talking to people that I meet about this event that's taking place.
But I think as well, we're in the situation now where we've got lots of established networks, and what we need to do is go beyond those established networks. The example that when I went to visit some of our partners in Cumbria, it's very difficult because those networks aren't established there. So what they've suggested in order to get patients along is that I need to go out to the patients where they are. So to actually go to, and they've suggested for me to go to the auction mart, which is because it's a big farming community, and all the farmers come in on a Tuesday. So go to the auction mart, tell people about the events. It's no good us sitting here and expecting people to come to us. I think we've got to make that effort to go out to patients. So I think that's next on my plan, is to look at how I can go out to those in rural Cumbria to try and get people along to these events. I think it's a mixed bag, really. Zoe, do you want to?
Yeah, just say it's not all about events, and sort of having, these are great and fantastic, but exactly what you were saying really is that, actually it's about connecting with people where they are. If we're really going to create diversity and inclusion, we need to build relationships.
So I think this might be another one for Zoe or Joe. So we've got, has it come up on the screen yet?
No, that's the last one.
See, it doesn't always work. There we go. So, what's the role of a co-applicant?
Ooh. Who thought you think about it? Well, that's a very good question, because what we're doing at the moment is producing some guidance on that, some updated guidance on it. We already have a little bit of guidance in our briefing notes. So, essentially, the role is to be a partner in the research. So, that involves sort of, you've got skills and experiences, and your knowledge is really important. So it's actually about sharing that with the researcher in a partnership. It does throw up some challenges, I think, which is what we're trying to address in making it clear in our guidance what that means for patients and the public, so what responsibilities they might have as a result of that, what the organisation needs to do to make sure that they can be fully part of it. So we've been working with quite a lot of partners, and I think I'm right in saying by the end of the year we'll be having something out on that. We've been working with the with the HRA and other partners as well, so the people that assess the quality of research and ethics, etc., in producing that.
Yeah, and it's a question that gets raised if researchers come to talk to me and say, well, I want a PPI co-applicant on this grant that's going in for a fellowship. And my question to them is why? Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, having a PPI member as a co-applicant becomes another tick box, and people think that's going to be the thing that gets me to the next stage. Mm-hmm. It's not. You've got to be quite clear about what the role is that you expect of that co-applicant, and I think there is that partnership. And what I try and get the researcher to do is to explain to me, what is it over and above somebody commenting and being your PPI members that are you expecting as a co-applicant? So that it's very much more involved, but it does throw up its challenges about, well, how do you cost people in? What's the liability? So that there's lots of issues that I think need to be resolved. But I think there are some projects, I think one's going to be discussed this afternoon, where it's been really successful, and that PPI co-applicant has been integral, but it's been a true partnership. Yeah. And I think that you've got to have that very different working relationship. So I think it's a question, it's a good question. I think it's one that's going to keep coming up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we've got time for one quick one.
One more. Okay, well, I think... So, what's the Twitter hashtag? It's a quick one. It's hashtag #CCDiversity. So if we can use that on any tweets. Can we have copies of Zoe's slides?
Of course you can.
We'll make sure understandable the frustrations. Something that we've actually just launched the last couple of weeks is an automated process for the voice platform, which hopefully you'll be seeing the benefits of soon, where it automatically, on a date stipulated by the researcher, when they involve members of the public and they start that public involvement journey, it will automatically email them and bug them for feedback. So hopefully by bugging researchers, we can really get to get them into that habit of providing feedback.
It's actually the indicators of the standards in communication is actually, how are you having a dialogue as you go through and giving feedback. It's not just at the end, the way through. It's really important. So yeah, it's a key part of that. And obviously with the standards sort of being built into very many ways of, again, it's part of a whole picture, isn't it? You can kind of encourage people and support them. You can kind of say it's part of how you're going to be measured. It's part of how you're going to report your research. So, for example, we're talking to the people involved. So. Okay.
So we'll just get Paula's presentation up.
Thank you. So I think this follows on nicely from Zoe's introduction of Involve's role, but taking a sort of a broader look at diversity and inclusion across the country. As Zoe said, we're guided by the Going the Extra Mile recommendations that set it as one of our national leadership areas. While there's a sort of focus on increasing the diversity of our community, it's embedded in all of those, improving access for people and collaboration and true partnership. So it underpins everything that we're doing and will be a focus of our next conference as well. Just wanted to share this quote with you from the World Health Organization 2020. That enabling people to have control over their health and its determinants strengthens communities and improves lives. Without people's active involvement, many opportunities to promote and protect health and increase their well-being are lost. So why wouldn't we be doing this? And the model at the side, it's a bit complicated, but it's sort of trying to show that we often focus on the individuals. You might work with an individual and get them to want to be involved in a study, but they'll go home and speak to their families and they'll go, no, research, you don't want to get involved with that. So you need some education for the family and the broader community. And we talked earlier about the sort of the barriers and who are we missing. This sort of ecological model puts the individual at the centre, so it's their own characteristics, but around that are all the other determinants of health and well-being. So their working environment, their living environment. And we often forget, we focus so much on the disease or the condition that we sometimes forget about everything else that's around that. And they can really compound health inequalities. So what's Involve's role? We see our role as very much as providing some leadership and creating opportunities for collaboration to bring people together at this shared endeavour. And when we started sort of 2 years ago, one of our first things was to sort of get our own house in order, to make sure that we as Involve was being as inclusive as possible. And to do that, we needed to understand what we mean by the terms diversity and inclusion. For many years, it was equality and diversity, but we felt equality and equity sit within this. So we felt that it was important to clarify what we mean by diversity and inclusion. So these are our definitions. We've also done a policy and a statement of intent of how we intend to work and what we're aspiring to. And all of that can be found through the link. And again, happy to share all the slides. Zoe's mentioned the standards, and we do feel that these are a key driver for change for this. And we, as a group, we've worked in partnership across the devolved nations with public contributors, and it was very important for us that inclusive opportunities was the first standard. Quite often we do things in the order that it needed the highest priority, but actually, again, it would sit under your communication standard, but we need to change how we're doing things. The other thing with this is driven as much, if not more so, by the members of the public, that they need the standards. We did the public consultation in the development of this, and we had 670 responses, and over 50% of those were from members of the public, really supporting the drive for this, but also giving us caution that don't make this a tick box exercise. So it's very much that this is going to be a reflective tool to help you look at the practice you're doing and think, actually, how can we improve that? Who can we include, and how do we need to do that? Public involvement is part and parcel of what the research community does, but actually, are we always involving the right people in the right way? And we want people to sort of reflect and think about it from their own perspectives. And so part of our role is about bringing people together. Our working group initially was very much looking at us as internally as involved. And earlier this year, we broadened the membership of the working group out to include the charity leads for public involvement. All the charities are working on diversity and inclusion. They've all got exactly the same challenges. They have core patient groups, but not always the most representative groups. And as a collective voice, the power that brings is really great, and the shared drive to move this forward. We went round at the first meeting just showing what the issues were, what our concerns were, and they were all the same around the table. But also, we found this piece of guidance, we've used this tool, we've done this, and it's sharing all of that knowledge, which is going to be the great thing to do. So events like this, I know we're going to hear some great different ways of working this afternoon. How do we then publicise that broader than NIHR and across the country? And these groups and the work leading into the charities is going to be a key way to do it. The other advantage of working with the charities is that they've got their patient populations, but many of them don't realise that research is something they can get involved with. So the more we work with them, the more we can raise the profile of that. I just wanted to say, how are we doing it and what do we feel needs to change? And the cartoon on the side, I see an awful lot, but I think it just captures what we're talking about. The cartoon shows the children waiting to go into school, and they're frantically trying to clear the steps of snow. But somebody's saying, why don't you clear the ramp and then we can all get in? And that's what we do. We often focus on all of our differences, but what we need to be doing now is focusing on our commonalities. We've talked already and we've heard about how it's important to build relationships. You think about all the relationships you have at work, at home, wherever. They always start with something in common. Be it you're a parent at school or you've got living with a condition, you've always got something common. You live in a specific area. So what we need to do when we're talking about building trust and working with communities is focusing on the commonalities. Intersectionality is there, and I know it's sort of a bit of a loaded word, but it was going back to that model at the beginning. Don't just think about the individual with the condition. Think about the context they're living in and everything else that's going on. An example we give is when we did a study looking into diabetes and people's perceptions about diabetes and wanted to provide an educational resource. If we only worked with the South Asian population identified as being at highest risk, if we only work with the affluent South Asian population, they speak English, they have access to services, they have access to private health care. The intervention is not necessarily going to benefit them particularly. We need to talk to the ones which don't have English as their first language, often don't read their own languages. So, we just need to think about how we're working and who our end users are. Another quote for you is that we all live with the objective of being happy. Our lives are different, but they are fundamentally all the same, and we need to sort of keep that focused. And I've sort of talked about the different determinants that we need to consider when we're working with different communities and different individuals, but also the potential impacts of your work. Just sharing, getting people, they get more information about their condition, how to manage it. You give them opportunities to work with you and ask questions. they're sharing that information with their families and beyond. These are impacts of our studies as well. You know, it goes beyond the study itself. So how are we going to do this? It is fundamental. There's no right or wrong model with any of this, and people often want this cookbook. If I 2, 3, 4, I'm going to get great involvement with everybody I need to involve. It doesn't work like that, and every situation is going to be different. But it's about working with the potential end users. And studies we've done, we worked with the receptionist at the community centre, the local community centre. She had knowledge of the population, how best to engage with them, where to hold the meetings, or what meetings would be great to piggyback on because they've got a creche facility for the children, and all these sorts of things. And also people like the interpreters that we trusted by the community, because oftentimes we resort to the systems that, you know, you can get an interpreter from here. But if they're not trusted, you're not going to get a very valuable experience from that. And so different ways of delivering our research. We've talked about we need to be going out a lot more, not expecting people to come in to us. And the slide there is the Deaf Cafe. There are lots of online fora where people are talking about their issues, their priorities, their concerns. We can work with these fora to understand and get research raised in there, saying that actually we take on board your concerns. This research could help, or you know, we need to prioritise this. And then learning from other sectors. So last year, the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion in Science and Health Network, EDIS, was launched by Wellcome, GlaxoSmithKline and the Francis Crick Institute. The idea was to bring together a research funder, an institute and industry. And this year it's just been broadened out to the membership, so it's open to all. The links are there to join it, to find out. But the idea is that everyone was previously working in silos, so again, back across the system. And the idea is we're going to share resources, identify gaps where we need support and resources to fill, you know, to understand how we can do things differently and learn from each other, and invest in that, invest in small projects, research. So I think that's going to be an exciting movement to bring the health and science community together on this agenda. And so what do we hope to get from this? So I think the biggest thing is we want true collaboration, real meaningful partnerships. And one of the big priorities is not our responsibility per se, but we feel one of the biggest things we have to offer as a health science organisation is giving people information about their health. So health literacy, again, is another one of these terms that's interpreted in very different ways. It's not just about reading and writing. Translating your piece of research or your intervention or your service pathway into 20 languages doesn't suddenly make that accessible. And as I like the fact that this is very personal, that health literacy is a person's characteristics, so that's the gender, the way they're living, all these sorts of things, but the things that they actually need to support them to be able to access, understand, appraise and use health services and to make their own decisions. We're very much about sort of patient-driven care, but actually if patients don't have the right information, that is quite a challenging choice to make. So that comes from the Ophelia project, which is an Australian project, which completely, they wanted to redesign all their health and social care services and flipped it on its head and asked the patients, what do you need? How are we going to make this? And the questions they asked and were wanting answers to were so, you know, they were very fundamental to the point that clinicians were going, that's never going to work. But it did, and it's radically changed access to the services in Australia. And there's lots of projects around the world that link into the of that. Research with the highest quality that's going to benefit the population for all, and we need that population to be truly partners in that for that to happen. It's fabulous to be here to see all your different organisations and all the individuals in the room coming together as a community, creating connections. Can't sum it up well enough, I think, as the name of your network, because you are all working together in a single direction. And again, I like this quote: the diversity is the art of thinking independently but together, and that's what I think this network is doing. And I hope that some of the national drivers, like the standards, will spur you on and show that you are actually all doing this, and it's really meaningful. Just wanted to leave you one final quote. Sorry, I've been a bit quote heavy. One person can make a difference. and everybody should try, and I'm really grateful to see everyone here that's doing that. Thank you.
I'm just looking for Alex, because he's the man with the Mentimeter. If I touch it, it'll break, I'm sure. Yeah. So we'll just have 1 or 2 questions before we break for lunch. I'll just add in a question, if I may, since I've got the microphone. I think one of my concerns is that by trying to increase diversity, we can introduce another tick box. And have you got any kind of insight into that, how we can avoid doing that?
Again, it goes back to the your response to the question about co-applicant. It's about what's the purpose, who are you involving, and why. If you start going down the, oh, we've got people from this ethnicity, this age group, and it's like, and that can become a tick box if there's no clear purpose for why they're being involved and why they're the right people to be there. We get often asked that if people with an academic background aren't allowed to be public members or patients in our reviewing panels and those sorts of things because they're academics. And I'm like, yeah, but they might be bringing a very valid patient perspective or carer perspective often. And so it's about clarifying why they're the right people to be involved.
Yeah, we're going to ask Alex to repeat the acronym for voice.
Oh, really? Oh. Valuing our intellectual capital and experience. So everyone's going to be tested on that at the end of the event.
So if I can read the question there. One is, it's a general question. Is there a way of including PPI during a systematic review stage of research?
Yes, there definitely is, and there's a really nice example where it was used in breast cancer, and it was looking at the outputs of all the research data, and the individuals that were looking at the data, they were like, it's all about time of survival, and there's nothing here looking at the quality of life. And actually for a patient, that's really important, and that changed because of that systematic review and those findings from the public members, there was no data that talked about quality of life. That is now expected in any trials that around breast cancer. So the public involvement can pull out themes in systematic reviews and help the researchers, but it also can identify gaps in the evidence and the reported data. So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, and I think this afternoon one of the presentations talks about how we can involve public members in data analysis as well, which is another one that's often asked. So I think we're going to leave it there for lunch. I've heard it arrive. So if you'd like to make your way around to the back for lunch, and please take the opportunity to go to some of the stands and pick up some information and ask lots of questions. And we'll see you back here for 1 o'clock. Thanks very much. Right, welcome back everyone. I think there's a few people still having brownies, but if you can make your way forward, that'd be great. We've had a really interesting morning. There's been lots of really positive feedback, and hopefully we can carry that through to this afternoon. What we've got now are 4 case studies of successful and really innovative PPI within the North East and North Cumbria, and quite different methods. We spoke earlier about there being different models for different situations, and I think you see 4 very different models here. So in the we've been trying new things all day, haven't we? So this is another new thing. We had a speaker, Jen McAnuff, who's done some brilliant work with young people with neurodisabilities, and she really wanted to speak today, but she's out doing some field work, so she can't actually be here. So she said that she would do her presentation live across the internet to us today, and I said, no, that's going to tip me right over the edge. Can you think of another way of doing it? So she's sat and she's recorded her presentation as an audio file, and she's timed her slides. So Jen won't be here, but you'll hear Jen and you'll hear all about this work. And I think you'll appreciate by the end of the presentation why it was an important presentation to include in this quite quirky way. So let's hope I can do this right.
social inclusion and academic achievement. But children and young people with neurodisability are restricted in their leisure participation compared to their non-disabled peers. This means they miss out opportunities to experience the developmental benefits of leisure activities, which in turn further disadvantages their wider health and well-being. In the NHS, allied health professionals support children and young people with neurodisability to participate at home, at school and in the community. By allied health professionals, I mean occupational therapists, physiotherapists and speech and language therapists. However, there's limited evidence about how they can best support participation in leisure. So to fill this gap, the NIHR and Health Education England funded my clinical doctoral research fellowship to investigate what factors influence whether children and young people with neurodisability participate in leisure, what intervention techniques can allied health professionals use to target and change these factors, and how should they go about delivering these intervention techniques in the NHS. My research methods were based on the Medical Research Council's guidance for developing complex interventions, as well as theory and evidence about health behaviour change. First, I reviewed the current research about factors influencing participation in leisure. Then I talked to children and young people, parents, allied health professionals, sports coaches, short breaks and respite professionals, and researchers to get their experiences and expertise. Currently, I'm integrating all this evidence into a practical manual for allied health professionals to use in the NHS. The next step is to investigate the feasibility and acceptability of actually using the manual in the NHS and to evaluate whether the intervention techniques in the manual are effective. So 2 stages of this research were co-produced with young people: the data analysis and interpretation and the dissemination. So I'd like to describe how I did that and share some reflections about the process. You're also going to see on the slide some images of our co-production activities. So I had factored in a budget for public involvement into my grant application, and I was very inspired by research projects where young people seen as vulnerable had used creative arts to contribute their perspectives and skills. I approached Lucy Barker, an experienced participatory artist, and we decided to co-produce an animated film to share the research results. We'd seen how co-produced animations had had a really good impact. So we worked with young people from my last involvement project, and we also collaborated with new young people from Pyramid of Arts, a collective of artists with and without learning disabilities in Leeds. We worked with the Yo-Yos, which is the young people's group at Pyramid. First off, we visited the young people at home to start preparing an inclusive and accessible co-production environment. We learned how to use their communication aids, powered wheelchairs, hearing aids, and how to carry out essential care tasks like assisting with having a drink. We worked around their schedules to set the date for our first co-production workshop, and we sourced wheelchair accessible taxis and venues with a changing place hygiene suite, level access and parking. These practicalities probably seem obvious. They're basic for enabling young people to attend and contribute on their own terms, but they can also pose major logistical challenges. They're time consuming to sort out and they're often overlooked, so it's worth highlighting them up front. 8 young people aged 16 to 21 years got involved in the production. 3 young people with neurodisability, their 3 personal assistants, and 2 young artists, one of whom has a learning disability. We wanted young people to be the predominant age group throughout the process. This would set the right tone and create an environment where people could be vocal and feel confident and in control. We made sure that young people could attend without their parents, and we made arrangements with them directly, with their parents copied in if needs be. This helped to make the co-production developmentally appropriate and ensured we didn't add to the parents' considerable workload. As we got started, we realised that researchers and artists bring very different knowledge and skills to the co-production table. Researchers generally use predetermined protocols, specified methods, and aims and objectives, whereas artists create spaces and processes for exploring ideas, seemingly without a fixed agenda or purpose, and respond to what emerges. For our co-production, Lucy, the artist, recommended loosely structured workshops with time built in for playing, experimenting, bonding, and processing the density of the research. She was confident, and methodologically she thought it was important to take risks and see what happened. From my point of view, this felt risky and uncomfortable. How did such flexible, open-ended approaches fit with funded deliverables and fixed timescales? What would the NIHR say? What would the academic community think about our artistic outputs? And how was all of this going to help disseminate the research? I was having to embrace uncertainty, step outside my comfort zone, and be open-minded about diverse methodologies. In the end, the creative methods were the very aspects that freed us up to take a fresh perspective on the research, to share control with the young people, and to develop a shared sense of responsibility for the project. Interdisciplinary collaboration between researchers and artists enriches co-production, particularly with groups of people seen as vulnerable, and researchers can build opportunities for diverse methodological approaches into their funding applications. We did 5 one-day co-production workshops over 10 months, mostly in the school holidays and occasionally at the weekend. To help build relationships, we agreed initial ground rules and created a giant timeline where we plotted everyone's birthdays, exams, holidays and important events. The first hour of each workshop was devoted to socialising and catching up on timeline news. After the workshops, we used social media to share photographs of our activities, keep in touch with each other, and decide when we would next get together. The young people were confident about taking responsibility right from the start, so we kicked off by analysing a selection of animations and deciding on a short list of desirable features for our film. We learned that real-life stories were a good way of opening up the research to the young people, so I went back to the data and extracted participants' verbatim stories to be explored in more detail. Simultaneously, the group experimented with different art forms, including light painting, animating and printing. Combining the art with the research was refreshing. Making things gave us all time to reflect on the data and sparked conversations about how health and social care policy and practice actually played out in the young people's day-to-day lives. They made connections between the issues in the data and their own views on short breaks, direct payments, accessibility of buildings, and rules and regulations in schools and leisure centres. As a researcher, this challenged me to think hard about impact. How was my research going to address their problems? Between the workshops, Lucy and I reflected on what the young people had said, and we planned the next workshop in response to their ideas. The young people's perspectives were threads that we followed in and out of the research data, and we brought back further stories and examples related to the issues they thought were important. By halfway through the co-production, the young people had decided on the key messages for the animated film. They decided to focus on some of the tensions around hanging out with friends, because this topic resonated with their own experiences. On the one hand, they thought hanging out with friends was one of the most important parts of participation in leisure and links with subjective well-being. On the other hand, they had seen in the research data that some professionals thought hanging out doesn't have much value and that participation in sport is more important. These sorts of tensions have been highlighted in other projects, but prior to the co-production, I wasn't particularly tuned into those data in my research. As well as the animated film, the young people spurred us on to create a giant Snakes and Ladders board game to illustrate the research results. This came out of us learning just how much they love a bit of competition. We also made a series of light paintings and a large abstract print, all of which emerged from our joint exploration of the research and different art forms. Co-production should be reciprocal. Everybody should benefit from working together. A key benefit for me was learning how to open up the research to people outside the academic team. On a practical level, this meant getting better at communicating in plain English and condensing down the data whilst preserving its nuance and meaning. On a deeper level, it meant I had to become less protective of the research. I had to resist the temptation to over-explain the data and try not to control how Lucy and the young people understood the results. It was important to give them time to digest it all and come up with their own interpretations. From the outset, it was essential for the young people to get something back from the co-production. Our first priority was for the workshops to be enjoyable and challenging, as well as inclusive and accessible. They were an opportunity to combine academic and creative thinking, to explore perspectives on live research data, and to experiment with art forms the young people had not previously experienced. We had learned to have high expectations of the young people's abilities, and we wanted to make sure their contribution was meaningful, substantial, and challenging. We didn't want to fall into the trap of merely entertaining them. Worse still, we didn't want to use them to endorse research results that we had already decided on. We wanted to use their knowledge and skills in a way that led to personal growth and development for all of us. For the young people, the co-production was also a context for forming friendships and developing a sense of group identity. Partway through the workshops, one young person named the group Animates, with a capital M, a play on our animation work and the social aspects of getting together regularly. We decided together that Animate's job is to make artwork about research projects. The two young artists in the group designed an Animate's logo, capturing the ideas of asking questions, having fun, voicing your opinion, making things, and being together. As a group, we socialised outside of the research by visiting one of the young people's first exhibitions as a solo artist and having a celebration lunch. This was pleasurable. It helped to strike a balance between more challenging academic aspects and more laid-back aspects. I've learned that co-production is characterised by relationships that bring out the best in people, but the relationships, as well as the processes, are often messy, emergent, uncertain and emotional. Researchers may need to transgress traditional boundaries, and the unwritten rules about how we interact with the public may need to be challenged. But crucially, this may introduce ethical complexities that we need to understand and navigate carefully. Our co-production gradually became a springboard for new ideas about how young people can make a greater contribution to neurodisability research. We applied for sustainability funding from Engage FMS at the Faculty of Medical Sciences, Newcastle University, and we made a plan for maintaining and developing Animates in the coming years. By this point, we understood the individual young people's capabilities and interests, so the funding was able to provide paid work for Animates members. Two young people designed a Facebook group to describe our co-produced research, curate our artworks, introduce Animates to the world, and get more people involved. One young person developed our giant Snakes and Ladders board game for manufacture. Two young people are organising a film premiere in December to screen our research animations for the first time to practitioners, decision makers, funders, parents, young people themselves and the general public. At this event, people will also hear more about the research programme. And one young person has become a co-investigator on two further national research studies, one funded by NIHR and the other funded by the British Academy of Childhood Disability and the Castine Foundation. Another recent spin-off is that a further young person is coming to a local conference in the NHS Trust to present on her experiences of health services, and through Animate she's developed the confidence and skills to do that for the first time. Looking towards the future, we are interested in how co-production itself could have a positive impact on young people's friendships, peer support, work experience and employment, all of which are more restricted for young people with neurodisability. And we have plans afoot for evaluating both the impact of our co-produced artworks and events and the co-production processes themselves. Animates is set to feature as a case study in the new co-production how-to guidance being developed by Gary Hickey at Involve, where there will be more links, details and examples. But in the meantime, please do email or tweet me if you'd like any further information. And many thanks for this opportunity to tell you about our work.
I'll just let the last few slides go. I think you'll agree with me that that was a really interesting example of how to do PPI. And I think some of the take-home messages for me were that sometimes it's messy and it's a bit uncomfortable for us as researchers, and that we as researchers need to be challenged. And I think Jen will certainly agree that she was challenged during that, but with great success. So we'll move on now to our next presentation. Introduce you. Yeah. We've got Greg along here today, who I think somebody this morning said, how do we get young people involved in research and commenting on research? So hopefully this is an example of how it's been successful in this particular project.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how I follow that fantastic presentation. To put it into context, I am currently an academic clinical fellow working in the paediatric department at Newcastle Dental Hospital. I'm about to submit for a doctoral research fellowship where I have included quite heavily PPI involvement with both adults and children. And I've taken some fantastic ideas from that presentation. But today I'm here to discuss and really chat to you about how I've found involving children in my research, particularly in understanding the impact of a particular condition which forms the basis of my research. So traditionally, it was always thought that patients and the public were research participants, but I'm sure everyone in this room is very much a convert that we're now classified as research partners. And this is highly important for adults, for children, and for anyone who wants to be involved in research. Particularly involving young people in research, well, why are they so unique? Well, children themselves, infants, adolescents, they have a right to high quality healthcare and appropriate health services that should be available to them. However, there is underrepresentation of the views of infants, children and young people in research projects. And this is kind of what inspired me to really get children involved in the developing of this particular idea. We also know that young people, adolescent populations, have actually experienced the least improvement in health status over any age group in the last 50 years. So therefore, by including research within this age group and including these people in the design and develop of research, we can then start to think about developing age-appropriate services, which we know will then improve the quality of their care. But children are also interesting facets. They make research relevant. It's amazing when you talk to children about research. They're enthusiastic, they're excellent to work with, and what also helps by involving children is that it focuses the research directly on child-related health issues, of which my project I'm going to talk about in a minute does. We also are able to include the skills, the knowledge and the expertise of these young people, which I think sometimes do go unheard. The voice of the child is really important, both in a clinical setting as well as a research setting. Children are insightful, and their ideas can really lead to further research. And the whole basis of my doctoral research fellowship was based on one patient interaction when I started in my clinical fellow post, where a child said to me with this particular problem, "What do I do, doc?" And I laughed because I'm not a doctor. I'm a dentist, I'm quite proud of that. But he said, "What do I do? What would you do?" And I found that a really difficult question to answer. And well, the decision we make now is going to impact you for the rest of your life, but we don't know that answer. And it really started to get me thinking. And vitally as well, by involving young people in research, we can actually then understand how we deliver the impact and the findings to the children themselves, and particularly using co-production methods, using child-specific groups, and using various other appropriate means of social media can be really useful. So I'm sure most of you will have heard of YPAG, and we're very fortunate in Newcastle to have YPAG Northeast, who've been really influential and instrumental in my developing my project. But more so have been an excellent source of information to just as almost like a sounding board. Particularly Joe Ball and colleagues Tracy Scott have been really fantastic. And I'd advocate any child-based researcher to keep a YPAG close to them. So I suppose kind of moving on, this is my experience of involving young people. So to put it into context, I'm developing my project and I'm looking to understand the impact a particular condition has on children. So to give you a little bit of context to this story, dental decay in this first adult molar tooth, okay, which is the first molar in your back, 5% of 8-year-olds have this, but that increases to 25% of 15-year-olds. So 1 in 4 children have dental decay in their first molar tooth. And that's not to say that it doesn't affect other adult teeth, it does, but by far this is the most commonly affected tooth. This tooth also comes into the mouth around the age 6.5, 7 years old. So it's quite a significant problem. Furthermore, they can be affected by developmental conditions, as shown by this picture down here, where the tooth doesn't develop properly. And actually, when you look at the kind of literature that supports that, the majority of these teeth are affected, but the severity can vary. And this is the same patient. You can see how one is quite severely affected, but in this case, it very much looks like a normal tooth. The best management to actually, how do we deal with these teeth? Do we take them out? Do we fill them? We don't know the answer. There's some bit of evidence to say that one works over the other, but we really don't know. And as I said previously, making decisions in a child, how does that impact them at age 30, 40, 50, 60? So the whole point of my PPI work pre-fellowship was to really establish the impact that these teeth have on both patients with the disease and also their parents. And I'm really going to talk about just the child-specific questionnaires we developed today. So using YPAG, we developed child-specific questionnaires. We looked at sampling 60 children with 50 parents in our clinic at Newcastle Dental Hospital. The process itself, of dividing the questionnaire, initially started with patient groups with YPAG and with some patients on the clinic. We then went on to develop the questionnaire, review it with patients before we handed it out. But I really want to talk about using YPAG. I went along to YPAG, and I think it's testament to the fact of the involvement in YPAG that it took me almost 2.5 months to get a session to go and work with these young people, which I think shows the diverse and the sheer amount of research being done with children in the North East, but also the potential for capacity building and including more diverse groups to really give us, as researchers, a greater opportunity. I went along, I spent 5 minutes talking through my project, grossing children out with pictures of teeth and pus and swelling, which they loved. And then we broke into separate groups. And to give you a little example, these are 4 A1 sheets of paper that I came away with. This was just from one of the group works. We had 4 different stations. This was 20 minutes, so I had 16 of these to decipher from these young people. The young people involved were aged 9 to 18. And they really had different opinions, different backgrounds. But the one thing that was very much common was that they were all from, shall we say, affluent groups. And that's something that I'm hopefully going to elaborate on a little bit. But I asked them what to include in the questionnaire, and they very much told me the answers. Pain, eating, sleeping, and how it affects patients' daily activities. I asked them what age groups to be involved, because I thought initially going in that 2 questionnaires, 6 to 12 and 12 to 16, would be suffice. That idea was torn apart and ripped up to shreds by the lovely young cherubs. And they said they wanted more questionnaires, more age-specific, which was great. I asked them as well, how do we ask patients? How do we ask them the questions, and how do we get them to give us the answers that we're looking for? And also importantly, ask them where to ask these questionnaires. There are multiple areas within a dental setting where we can ask children before they come in the dental chair, whilst they're waiting for their x-ray, or before they go home. And actually the children were really insightful to say, well, do you know what? If you ask them before they come in, they're probably going to be very nervous, so you're not going to get the right answer. If they're going to an x-ray, I'd be panicked saying, what on earth am I going to get an x-ray? Is this going to be sore? So therefore, they're not going to give you the right answer. And by the time they've left the clinic, they want to go home, so they're not going to give you the right answer. So therefore, the dental chair unanimously was the most appropriate place to ask them, and that I wouldn't have got myself. So here are the questionnaires which went through multiple versions, and as you can see, the inclusion of a picture was picked up by one of the groups on the review, so this was added. To reflect what the young people wanted, we asked simple questions for the 6 to 9-year-olds and had smiley faces so they could circle or colour in the answers that would be the age group. To reflect the slightly more mature 9 to 12-year-olds, we asked questions that were a little bit more in depth. We gave them a slightly better opportunity, a bigger scale to answer. And then with the 12 to 16-year-olds, to reflect their adolescent nature, we gave them the yes-no question. So looking at the results, and this is just for pure interest, actually, the children, 6 to 9-year-olds, when you look at 1 as no impact and 6 is the most, children are having pain significantly from these teeth. And that's in the 6 to 9-year-old group. And I think if I'd asked that question without the questionnaire, I wouldn't have got these results. For the simple reason, the children may have not truly understood what I was asking them, particularly thinking about daily activities and eating. With the 9 to 12-year-olds, where 1 was no impact and 10 was most impact, again you can see that the scores are really high. This is a big problem. And when we asked 12 to 16-year-olds looking in the last 3 months, 85% of them, or 17 out of the 20 children, had had pain. Slightly less so for daily activities, which might be because they can cope better with the pain than younger groups, but this is still a big problem. And I've only put this slide in because it really illustrates the point of listening to a child, and that's not just from a clinical point of view, but also from a researcher's point of view. It's because in the dark blue here, okay, we actually asked the parents, did their children have eating difficulties? And 27 said they did. But when you compare it to the children, 51. And this theme was consistent across daily activities and sleep loss, where actually the parents tended to underreport the impact that these teeth were having on the children. So again, using children by to establish that has really given us some interesting results. As part of the oral and dental PCPI group, I sent out kind of the parent questionnaire, and this is just some comments and quotes from the parents talking about how it really affects the child. And these are really in-depth and really powerful messages, saying that, you know, I mean, they have problems with their teeth. The emotional stress, it's unbearable, suffering, guilty and concerned about her future, but also that to some people it just doesn't affect them, and that is a true representation of the dental disease. What this really gave me an opportunity was that I then presented this work on the impact at our national conference up in Dundee, the British Society of Paediatric Dentistry Conference, where I really championed and campaigned for involving patients in research. And actually, because of that, I then went on to win the research prize at this conference. And I've used Twitter here because I'm a big advocate of Twitter and I really enjoy it. And actually, YPAG themselves were congratulating me. But as my statement here quite simply says, thank you to YPAG. It was only possible with the excellent work of the young people, and so delighted to promote PPI. And I really am. I'm very much a campaigner for involving children in research. So I suppose in kind of summary and conclusion, reflecting on my experiences of building up this idea pre-fellowship, YPAG were extremely helpful. They were fantastic. They were so gracious of me coming and were so accommodating. The children were imaginative. They were insightful. And it was a real opportunity to work with them. I am a paediatric dentist. I work with children every day, so I really enjoy doing that. But actually, as a researcher, engaging with these children, picking their brains and understanding how they perceive ideas was really invaluable. And it helped me listen to the voice of the child. And I think that's a really key aspect I want to get across in this presentation, is that involving children in research, we have to listen to what they want us to listen to, not what the parents will tell them to tell us. But I suppose, reflecting on things, I have to be considerate that YPAG, is it truly representative of all children? And I think that's a kind of key thing, particularly with today, that involving diverse groups and involving children of different socioeconomic demographics, ethnic diversities, is really where I want to take this piece of work. And as I said, I hope to liaise with more of these diverse groups, because actually that's where the problem lies. Dental disease is not often prevalent or not often involved, with affluent people. The social demographic, ethnic diversities is where the problem lies. So my hope is to take this piece of work and go and work with them and start to understand better. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come through on Mentimeter, so I just wanted to ask you one question, if I may. And the question referred to the fact that you're a clinician, a dentist, and you're used to speaking to people. So does that make doing PPI easier because you're used to, or is it different?
Thanks. I think it depends on who you're speaking to. I think very much engaging with the public and communicating as a clinician, it does help because of the communication skills which have been built up through my training does help that engagement. But actually sometimes it could be a hindrance, and it can be a hindrance because you think as a clinician you know the right answer and often you don't. I'm happy to admit that. I suppose acting as a paediatric dentist, that's where I think I really came into my own working with children, because the feedback from the YPAG group was that I was able to work with them, understand, listen to them, and I think it's probably just because I've been so used to working with children that now when adults start asking me questions, I tend to just turn off because I really want to hear what the children say. But yeah, so it does influence, but I think it can influence good and bad.
Just one final question that's just come up there, and it says, would you do it differently next time, and how would you do it differently?
Good question. I suppose establishing the impact, there are other ways of doing it. We could have had focus groups, we could have had small group work, we could have done some sort of co-produced sort of idea of bringing children together. But I really think that this way gave me the answers that I really wanted and gave me the ammunition to show how much these teeth impact children. And I think trying to get children from ages 6 to 16, trying to get them down with their levels of maturity, understanding, to get the answers would have been really difficult to do it in their methods. So I probably wouldn't change I think my approach really worked. And I think the children really received it as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Don't forget to keep sending your questions in for the other presentations. Thank you. And the next speaker is I'd like to introduce Alison Farnworth, who's works here at the university, but also she's brought with her today Janine, who's an antenatal educator, who's going to tell us all about the work that they've been doing.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for having me here today to talk about some of the work that we've been doing around patient and public involvement and engagement in maternity-related research. As Joe said, we're presenting this as a double act. Me and Janine have worked together. Janine is a lay representative on a number of projects that we've been involved with, and a really exciting initiative that we have to try and develop PPI further in maternity care research in the future. So I've been a researcher. I am a midwife by background. I've worked in research for about 18 years, and it's fair to say across that time period I've seen a lot of shifts in the way that we do PPI, and I'll fully admit that in the olden days when I first started, PPI was quite a tokenistic activity, and we've all recognised now that that's a waste of everybody's time and it doesn't get what we need, which is full engagement if what we're trying to do. So in maternity, we face the challenges that anybody faces in terms of doing PPI, but there are some quite specific areas that maternity throws up. So the first is that maternity care, maternity-related research is quite a tight. The population that we're targeting it's quite time limited. They're transient, so pregnancy is not an illness, it's a life event. Women get pregnant, they have a baby, and then they move on with their lives. So if you think about the life cycle of research, which takes forever, somebody who is involved in developing an application for funding could well have a toddler or even a school-aged child by the time you're actually funded and getting to do that research. And whether they would retain their motivation to be involved in what you're doing across that time period, and whether you would feel that their views are still relevant at that point, is a real difficulty. Pregnant women are often busy women, okay, so a lot of pregnant women work well into their pregnancies. They have to fit in antenatal appointments and classes, etc., that use up their time, and a lot of parents will also have caring responsibilities for other family members. Once you throw a newborn into the mix, you don't even have time to pee, let alone get involved in research projects. So it throws up a real challenge for us about how we can engage with these very, very busy people. Of course, not all aspects of maternity care are happy. There's a lot of sadness around in maternity care too. Not all babies get to go home, unfortunately, and there is real sensitivities about how you approach research that might involve things like miscarriage, stillbirth, babies that are taken into care, all of those sorts of issues. And that's not just an issue for research that is about that topic. Any given group of pregnant women that you're talking to are likely to have some people who have experienced some kind of loss, and it's important to acknowledge that. And then finally, the pregnancy is a time of real anxiety for some women, and also it's fair to say a time of real judgment for them. So a lot of people have a lot to say about what pregnant women should and shouldn't do. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that when you're doing research, you have to kind of create the kind of environment where people can talk about their experiences without making them super anxious about whatever research you're trying to do, and without making them feel judged about some of the decisions that they make around pregnancy. So again, that's a real challenge for us. So all of that means that the traditional models of PPI, where we're kind of inviting people into the university environment, don't always fit for a lot of the women that we want to speak to, and miss out huge swathes of the population. And whilst we can kind of try and break the mold and say, bring your baby along, and we're more than happy for people to do that, for women, it takes a certain kind of confidence to turn up to a meeting at a university and start breastfeeding, and you're actually excluding a lot of the population if that's what you're trying to do. So our approaches have moved more towards taking our research out of the universities and the hospitals and into the communities where people are already meeting and working with them in that way. So I'm just going to give you 2 case studies of projects that I've been involved with and talk about how that has led on to some work that I'm doing with Janine at the moment. And then Janine's going to jump in and talk about her experiences from a lay perspective. So one of the projects I did was about early pregnancy loss, so that's miscarriage. So clearly a very sensitive area, and what we were looking at is what women and frontline staff thought about early pregnancy loss services and how that could translate into service improvements. We worked with the Miscarriage Association in the first instance when we were creating the project application, so they're a national charity. And then once we were funded, we went back to the Miscarriage Association, who had a kind of local, I would say chapter, that's not right, but they had a local support group. And luckily, we had 2 individuals come forward who said that they'd be willing to be involved in our research and sit on our steering group. It's fair to say there are some challenges that we came across with that. So, for example, the first steering group meeting, the room was changed and it was put into the special care unit. Now, that's not a place where women who've experienced a pregnancy loss want to be. And so we had to kind of speak to the whole steering group at that point and say, actually, all the rest of our meetings have to be in a completely different part of the hospital, and just be aware of what people are bringing into this meeting. Another challenge is that one of our lay participants, she kind of dropped off a little bit after the first year of the project, and we don't know why. And it's really hard to kind of approach people and say, why are you not coming to our meetings anymore? Maybe she moved on, maybe we weren't doing it right. I think we all had something to learn from that. One of the really interesting things that came out of this study is that we had a kind of remit within this to not just do the research, but then to take the research out into the clinical area and work with practitioners to see how it could impact care. So what we did was we had a workshop which involved doctors and nurses and midwives who were working at the RVI and delivering early pregnancy loss services to talk about what the results of the research had been and what they could do with that to try and improve what they were doing. Our lay representative said, I'd like to come to that workshop, and we were kind of like, okay. So she came along. And that actually transformed the dynamic of that whole workshop. Now, I think it's fair to say that that individual was quite a confident woman, and she felt very comfortable talking about her loss and her experiences. And the most uncomfortable people in the room were the practitioners, who were there talking about what their services were to someone who was directly affected by it. It's not something I would ask every patient to do, but I think it was a really useful tool in that particular project. So case study 2 is a project I was involved with induction of labour, and Janine was also involved in this project. We were talking about being a patient and a practitioner, a researcher. This is actually a photo that I took while I was being induced, so I have personal experience from both sides. So in this project, we wanted to have some lay representation on our steering group again, and we went via social media this time to find people, and we found Janine that way and another individual. Those two individuals had a lot of input into how that study progressed and what we did with it. Again, there was a remit within that study, not just to do the research, but to actually use the evidence to implement a change. And what we wanted to do was to develop a resource for pregnant women to access evidence about induction of labour. We worked with Janine, who runs a business and has a postnatal groups, and Janine said, well, actually, you could come to the postnatal group, and that would be a really good way to talk to women. And so we did that. And so this is what the kind of meeting, this is not a photo of it, but it was this kind of event. It's fair to say that this is a pretty chaotic way to do research. You know, there's babies fighting with each other, there's women breastfeeding, there's nappies being changed, etc. But it was a really useful way to be able to talk to women in an environment they were comfortable with, which was basically their turf, about what we wanted to do. And what we did was we developed a resource which is now available on NHS Choices and is accessed by about 3,500 women a year, which is really useful. One of the kind of spin-offs, I guess, from that was that we, having had that experience, another researcher came to me. She was doing research and wanted to do some PPI. And I said, go and talk to Janine, and she did a similar thing. And then, having recognised the value of bringing the research community and the pregnant women or postnatal women community together in this way, we got a small amount of funding from Newcastle University to continue to run baby group sessions that were research specific. So basically researchers who are doing maternity related research can come along to one of these sessions, talk about what they're doing, and talk about it with women who have recently accessed maternity services. We've run about 9 sessions so far. They run every couple of months. Researchers come to us. The sessions are facilitated by me and Janine, or a different researcher with Janine. And they've led to a lot of good outcomes for the researchers, but also, I think, from the women who have report quite positive outcomes. So I'm going to pass over to Janine just to talk about your experiences, because obviously you're coming at it from a different perspective to me.
Hello. Presentation novice here, so slightly nervous. So I'm a practitioner. I work with expectant parents and with new parents, primarily on their maternity leave, so kind of mums on maternity leave. I've been doing it for quite a few years now, 15, 16 years. So when I first got the opportunity to work with Alison, it was initially to be able to use my experience to be involved with research. But then as we've kind of got more groups of mums involved, as a practitioner, I learn so much from talking to women who have been through maternity services, and it impacts on the role in my job and what I do with parents. So to actually have that feedback with research, I think was a really valuable tool, and that's why we've been so keen on getting these kind of sessions up and running. So the sessions that we run, as Alison said, we tend to do them every couple of months. They run in a community centre that I'm familiar with, that I use for a lot of my groups. So some of the mums are familiar with that setting. It's family friendly, so it's already set up. They know they can come in, they can change their babies, they can have a wander around. There's different seating, there's toys if they've got toddlers. So it is set up in that way. We tend to have small groups as well, so it can range from between 4 and 10 mums will come along with babies. Numbers can drop because people do drop out if they've had a bad morning with a baby. What we found is good communication is really important, because we're working with mums with young babies. They're pretty tired. So they want to know what's expected of them, and they want to have kind of something written to refer to as well, so that if they are feeding a baby, having to change a baby, or if they've brought a toddler with them and they're distracted, they've got something that they can refer to, and then they're not totally lost in the conversation. Obviously, you know, it's got to be informal and welcoming as well. I think the benefit of having these sessions in the community is that it's not in a clinical setting. They can be comfortable, they can have their tea and cake, they can have a bit of a chat, and it's just a friendly environment for which they can feel valued, and they can, you know, kind of share what they need to share, really. Issues to be aware of with kind of groups of mums, as Alison's already kind of suggested, is, you know, there is noise and there is interruptions. We've had running amok and pulling things off walls, and there's, you know, all sorts going on. Babies crying, and sometimes we're able to just talk over that and go with it, and sometimes we've just got to stop and allow that to happen and to be kind of sorted out, and then we can continue. So session times have to allow for that. So we kind of have 90-minute sessions, so we may not run for that long, but we've got time to be able to deal with noise and interruptions if we need to. On that same subject, emotions can come out from some women, depending on the subject that we're talking about. So when myself and Alison were doing the induction sessions, some women were quite upset because of their induction experience. Some were quite angry. The sessions for some of the women, so we had to allow the time for that to happen, and we wanted to learn from them, so it was important to allow that to take place as well. So they needed to continue to feel valued. And kind of what I've already suggested as well is about keeping it simple. Don't expect too much from that session, because these are women who are tired and they've got to look after their children while they're there as well. And we spoke to the women, and these are women that I'm in touch with quite a lot through either face-to-face work, or I have a community of parents through social media and through my website. So I do keep in touch with a lot of these mums who we've worked with in these sessions. And for a lot of them, it's about sharing their experiences, being involved, maybe being able to impact research in some way, to offer their perspective and to give feedback. They want to feel useful as well, and for a couple of mums, they've been really quite blunt and have said, you know, on maternity leave, they're really happy to use their brain again. They're and to be engaged in kind of conversation and being involved in something that's of use, rather than just changing nappies, which, although very valuable, can wear you down when you're a tired new mum. So the feedback's been really positive, and we do get lots of women who kind of ask about when the next sessions are and are they allowed to keep coming along. So really, I guess, just to pull it all together, how to get the most out of these sessions, for us anyway, it's been about, we get feedback from them about what would be helpful during the sessions. They're always comfortable. Tea and cake seems to be really important. I think there'd be a riot on our hands if that wasn't offered, and I don't think people would keep coming back. It's about it being really comfortable and inviting. And as a practitioner who works with mums with babies, you know, the environment
I think not realising, of course, you're only pregnant for 9 months, but why would you want to be involved in that research? I guess that's the key thing, isn't it? Do you think it would work if you expanded it to look at pregnancy and early years research?
I don't see why not. No. I don't see why not. I mean, the point of these sessions is that different women come to the sessions each time. So, I mean, there are repeat offenders, I was going to say. Yeah. However, it means that if you had a research project where you want to have feedback, you could plan to do that, but not necessarily have to have the same group of women every time. The benefit of having someone like Janine is that she's got a longer-term commitment to research, which has been invaluable to us. Janine's actually going to be a co-applicant on my next grant for that reason. Yeah. It never stops once we get you. But yeah, I mean, potentially. But of course, once women go back to work, I think that the situation gets a lot more difficult. I mean, and most people coming to a baby group will only do so for a little while, won't they?
I get a lot of people throughout that first year, so while they're on maternity leave, but once they go back, I don't see them again until they're having another baby, really.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And Alison and Janine facilitated one of the work groups that we've got this afternoon on exactly that topic. So if you've got some interest or insight, go along to their table afterwards. So our next speaker, Anu. Yeah, Anu's flying solo. Samina was meant to come along today, but because of work commitments, the PPI contributor, she's had to go to work this afternoon, so Anu's on her own.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for having me. My name is Anu Vaitin, and I'm a research associate at the Institute of Health and Society, and my fellow presenter, Samina Zia, was one of our, and still is, one of our PPI contributors and panel members for this particular study. So today I'm here to talk to you about and tell you about our experience of involving our PPI contributors, PPI collaborators in the analysis of interview data for our qualitative study on on patient safety in primary care. And just a couple of, see if I can master this device. Yes. So this is just to acknowledge the rest of our team, so our PI, Dr. Susan Rissos and Professor Richard Thompson, and the rest of our PPI team, Judith Hunter, Dave Green and Parveen Rasul, who were all part of the project. So just to give you a brief outline, I will introduce the study very briefly and what the role of our PPI collaborators was throughout the whole study, and also then focusing a little bit more on what the insights were from and the learning experiences from our involvement of our PPI members in interview analysis. In essence, what we did, why we did it, and how we did it, and what we learned from it. And then concluding with some reflections from myself, from the researcher's perspective, and then also from the perspective of our PPI collaborators. So essentially, I will not talk through all of this, but the study was a qualitative study to try and understand patient and family involvement in patient safety within primary care, and what patients and families could do to take an active role in their safety. And we also looked at some of the staff views on involving patients in safety within the primary care setting. And we also looked to assess the appropriateness of the Think Safe toolkit for staff, healthcare staff and patients to support patient and family involvements and them working together to improve safety. And finally, we are looking, and we're still working on this, so we are looking to develop adaptations into the toolkit that are suitable for primary care specifically. So very, very briefly, this is the design of the study. It was a 12-month study using qualitative methods. So we had interviews, face-to-face interviews with patients and staff. We also had co-design workshops, which were facilitated together with our PPI collaborators. And we also conducted a scoping review of interventions that had been done before and all of the best practice. 5 GP practices across the northeast of England were involved. There were 2 rural practices and 3 urban practices who took part in the study. We selected these purposefully based on the socioeconomic status and varied list size for each practice. And we had 21 staff participants overall and 18 service user participants, both patients and relatives. And then within our workshops, we had 10 staff and 10 patient participants. So, in terms of the PPI collaborators' role throughout our study, we were really looking to have our PPI collaborators involved from some of them were already involved somewhat in the application process, and then our panel for the study was involved in regular meetings where they were able to feed back on the study, and there was also one of our collaborators, a member of the project management group. As I already mentioned, they also played a role as facilitators in the co-design workshops that we conducted following the interviews with patients and staff. And following from there, they contributed to the analysis of the patient interviews. And finally, they were very integral to the delivery of the study dissemination event, which I'll get to a little bit later as well. So, the focus for today is really on sharing the experience of involving PPI collaborators in analysis of interviews. And our rationale for doing this was to try and increase the diversity of the PPI input in our study to include wider, non-white British, middle-class sociocultural perspectives. So, a little bit more on the why. So, in our regular meetings, our panel fed back to us on the patients, in particular as regards to the sample of patients. We recruited patients through the GP surgeries that were involved, so they were specifically patients at each participating practice. But what was highlighted by our PPI group was that there would be good to have a bit more diversity in terms of background of the participants. And we had a very, very good working relationship with our PPI collaborator panel, and we discussed and asked for them for possible solutions to this challenge that we'd encountered. And one of the proposed ways to approach this, although in a limited manner at this stage of the study, was to involve our PPI collaborators in the interview analysis of patient interviews. And it was really to try, and they wanted to kind of help us to sound out and test the resonance of the findings that were emerging at that stage. So, a brief introduction to how we did it in this particular study. So, we were aware that we wanted the PPI collaborators to be prepared for the task that we were going to give them, and them to feel comfortable and able to ask questions and give suggestions at that stage. What did they want and need in order to be able to do this? And we did have a specific session for this to allow questions and where questions and any kind of needs for support were discussed. So what the panel asked for was to have a clear brief in advance of what they were being asked to do, and some of the materials that were actual extracts from the interview data, so that they could see what the data was like and what it was telling them. And then we gave a brief task sheet outlining what we asked them to have a think about, and what kinds of things, as a researcher, do I have a think about when I look at data and try and work out what is this data telling me? What are these people's interview accounts telling me about their views on involvement in patient safety? So once we did that, in advance of the actual session, then we had a particular session that was, I believe, 2 or 3 hours long, where we had plenty of time to discuss, share notes, have a little bit of a discussion, and we also created, during that session, a big flip chart sheet of all the key things that emerged in our discussion. Now, in general, the PPI collaborators agreed with quite a few of the themes that were emerging and coming up, but there was insights that they were able to then highlight has this been considered? Is this something that we need to highlight as a limitation of our study and will grant further investigation? So then, giving you a little bit of insight into our PPI collaborators, mainly thoughts on her experience of being involved. As Joe mentioned, unfortunately, she's unable to be here today. So from her perspective, she found, and I had a discussion with her the other day, she really found it useful to be involved at all the different stages, not just once being brought in at one stage, being kind of having the ownership of that process. And mainly, all of our team felt as if they were supported at each stage of the process, and they were also given more opportunities to be involved after the study, or more extensive opportunities if they wanted to, but it wasn't required if they chose to do that. And then in terms of the analysis of the interviews, they found really being able to comment on the transcripts and the dialogues that the extracts provided, and kind of having a chance to see what the researcher looks at when looking at findings and seeing, well, where do these findings come from? Where does a theme come from? So that kind of involvement was found to be really, really useful. And as she's noted, they mainly agreed with the general themes that came out, but also they made some additional comments regarding the specific limitations in terms of the diversity of the sample of patients that were involved in the study. And would have been useful to have respondents from other age groups, in particular other ethnic backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. So they also had the chance to review all the information well in advance, and there was quite a good chain of communication, and we did get emails, and we went back and forth with emails in terms of clarification, etc. So our panel felt they were able to come to us if there was any questions about the process prior to the session in the actual discussion. So we also obviously had members of PPI panel of collaborators who were from different ethnic backgrounds, Samina being one of these individuals, and she felt it was useful to have the different perspective and the scope in particular in terms of the themes that emerged. Although there were some universal features, there were some diverse areas as well in terms of, for example, family support and role of the family in research involvement for patients that may be slightly different. Right, so there's my reflection. So in terms of the diversity of input into the process, it was really helpful to have that dialogue, because as a researcher, you consult a variety of materials. You have certain processes that you follow when you analyse data and analyse interviews. And essentially, there is a dialogue. It isn't entirely isolated, and you interact with other researchers a lot of the time. However, sometimes it does get a little bit isolated, and you think, am I staring at the same thing? Am I not seeing something that is coming from the data? And in doing that and in highlighting that, I found it was really, really useful exercise and really useful. What made it important, sort of most valuable for me, was that our PPI collaborators really found that process helpful as well in terms of their involvement and understanding of the study. Coming from a social science background, I'm very aware of the need to kind of be aware that interpret data, and having that input from the PPI collaborators was extremely useful in highlighting some of the challenges, some of the limitations, and I may get myself into trouble here, but say I love difficult questions. But in raising those questions, there's always potential to develop new understanding, and I think that is the biggest value and biggest insight that came from this whole process for me as a researcher. So I found it something that I will look forward to. And I think it strengthens the findings of the research overall. And fully address the diversity of the patient population that we had opportunity to recruit. However, this suggestion from the PPI collaborators was taken forward not only in the analysis but also in the dissemination event. So they had quite a great input in the way we shaped the dissemination event, where it was conducted. We tried to take it more into the community, where at least at that stage we could have a more diverse input into the findings of the study. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu. And she actually asked for difficult questions. So if anybody has any, before she runs away. I'd just like to ask one, and we had a question this morning about should we involve PPI in systematic reviews, and we spoke about that, and there was actually one of the delegates here today come up and told me that actually that's what she does. And you've told us about involving PPI members in research. What about, and I know the answer to this because we work together, but what about involving PPI members in publications?
Oh yes, oh yes. It is something that we are doing within the remit of this study. We are actually writing together with with our PPI collaborators on their experience and involvement in the analysis process as well. So it is something that it's definitely should be done.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Right, I think that wraps up our kind of case studies that we wanted to present to you this afternoon. Before we move into our group work, Paula is going to come and just tell us a little bit about the group work, and then I'll point you in the direction of the different groups where they're going to be held.
Thank you. One thing I meant to mention earlier, and I forgot, sorry. When we were developing the standards, I said we did this big public consultation, and there were 670 responses, and there was an awful lot of data there. And I would like to say a big thank you to the consumer panel here, because they went through that and they did a similar project with Anu and pulled out the themes and then helped produce a public-facing report from that. And it was really helpful, and we'll be coming back for some more work on that. So thank you for that. So the group work, once you split into your groups, we've got some questions for you to answer. You don't have to, they've got copies of these on the tables. But for the group that you're assigned to, you want to think about what the barriers to this group being involved in research. If you can list as many as you can and identify 3 key barriers, then what could be done to overcome these barriers and encourage and enable people to be involved and engaged? Again, listing as many as you can and identify which the solutions will really overcome the barriers you'd identified before. And then finally, the intention is to hold 3 further meetings with each of the groups over the coming year. And how do we get members from each of the communities along to the meetings? And what local groups or communities leaders can we contact to involve them in this, to make sure that we get the right people there? And also on your tables, if you could identify 1 person to feed back 3 key barriers and solutions back to the group at the end, that'd be really great. Thank you.
So some people have signed up to specific groups, but feel free to go to whichever group you can squeeze onto a table. Some have been exceptionally popular and we had to hide the list. So group 1 is going to be on the first table at the back there, and that's for mental health, which will be facilitated by, sorry, I've done a different way, by Sam. Group 2 is over in the very back corner, and that's for children in the criminal justice system and looked after children. Group 3 is on this table in the middle for those living in rural areas. Group 4, next to it, Anu will facilitate people who are working, so full-time working. Group 5, down this end for pregnant women. And Group 6, down the far end, those from black and ethnic minority communities. So we're trying to spread you out so that people can hear what's going on. Back together after about 30 minutes so that we can have some discussion at the end. Thank you.